Okay, for this first video, I just wanted to go over a few basic things. First involves cutting boards. So with cutting boards, you'll find that some cutting boards will have rubber edges that will hold it in place, but other ones like this plastic one will slide all over. So if you're trying to cut something, it's kind of hard to keep them in place. So if all you have are these plastic cutting boards, you can take a paper towel, wet it in the sink, and place it underneath. That'll anchor the cutting board. You can see that no matter how much I'm pushing on it, it's not sliding around. That'll keep the cutting board in place. So as you're cutting, you don't risk the cutting board sliding and you cutting yourself with your knife. Some cutting boards, as you use them over time, I don't know if you can see this, but this one is a little warped. So the center of the cutting board does not actually come in contact with the table, so it still slides around. What you can do, we have two options. One, if you flip it over and put the side that's bowed out down, that will anchor it in place. If you're still going to use these cutting boards that are bowed, you can still do that. The other option is to use a second paper towel on the other side, and that way you can keep the side that's bowed up at the top. See, this works pretty well, but not as good as if the cutting board is flush with the surface that you're cutting on. I'd recommend if you have a bowed one like this, that you anchor it with the bowed part touching the surface. These edges will push down as you're cutting, and so you won't have much of a problem with sliding. Now the next thing that I want to go over has more to do with hand position when you're cutting. This is something that I see a lot of people do wrong. When you're cutting, you don't want to have your hand flat while you're cutting. You're going to risk cutting yourself. What you want is to grab what you're cutting so that this finger has a surface here. So you notice the surface is there. It's about the width of the blade. So as I'm cutting, I can use that to guide my strokes if I need to, because the tips of my fingers are curled back, I'm not likely to cut into my finger, so that reduces the risk of cutting your finger. The other thing to note, you may have noticed, is that instead of lifting the entire blade and cutting straight down, you notice you may have heard a thump. That's going to dull the blade. You want to either leave the tip resting on the cutting board, or if it's small enough, such as like the tips of this, you can do it the other way. I don't like using my wrist as a fulcrum though, so I usually prefer to cut this way. You're rocking the blade down. As you're going, the blade is, you're moving the blade to move along what you're cutting. So you notice these circular, something you'll run into a lot, especially if you buy bags of carrots, is you'll have different sizes in the exact same bag. If you are doing something for presenting, you want to try to get uniform sizes of things. If you're doing a stew, or you're doing something in a pan just for your own meals, it's not that big of a deal. What you'll want to watch for in that case is kind of uniformity of size or thickness. So if I was to cut this way, these are going to be significantly smaller than these. They're going to cook at different rates, and so you'll end up with some that are mushy while some are still hard. What you can do is, if you have something that's small like this, if you cut at an angle, you will get longer pieces rather than these small ones, which are a little closer to what you may have if you're cutting straight across on the larger, thicker carrots. Next, we wanted to go over something with garlic. So with garlic cloves, if you're actually not buying chopped garlic, or you're essentially doing it fresh, you need to be able to break the garlic off. So usually what I'll do is I'll push from the bottom to get a piece. Works pretty well. What I find useful for these, this is a trick. If you take your knife and place it on top of the garlic and press down. You'll hear a crack. That typically will crack the outside shell and make it easier to pull off than if you tried to remove it normally. You see that I got the whole thing in pretty much one go. Take off that end that was connected to the bulb. And then to mince this, you want really thin slices. What you do is you just alternate the sides until you get smaller pieces. And usually what you do here, if this is not the size you want, if you want it minced smaller, you can rock the knife across the pile of garlic. Garlic's a little weird because it sticks to the knife, so you can pull it off, get it back into a pile, and keep going. The larger the pile of garlic, the easier this is to do. But you'll notice each time I do a pass through, the garlic is getting smaller. So if you're not going to use a garlic press, or you don't want to use a garlic press, this is one way to work the garlic. And the last thing I want to go over is a trick with onions. So when you're cutting onions, if you're trying to dice the onions, so if you're slicing the onions into just straight up circles or into half rings, then you're not going to do this. But if you want to dice the onions, this is common for like stews. Cut the onion in half, get the peel off. This is typically the easiest way to do it, is to just cut it in half. It gives you a surface to grab the peel on. Now, there's an exterior peel that's brown. You'll also notice, you may see here that this is at the edges a little green and tough. You can leave it on, or you can pull a whole layer off in addition to that. You'll also notice that here, this is the base of the onion. You can either pop it out, or you can put it down and make a triangular incision and then pull it out. This just makes it so that you don't have the kind of thicker pieces of onion there. Now for dicing the onion, you're going to make cuts in 3 different directions. First direction is along base here. So you don't want to cut all the way through. You go pretty close to the edge, but not all the way through. And there's a reason for this that we'll get to in a second. So make a couple cuts this way. You'll make a couple cuts straight down. Now notice I'm not going to the full end of the onion. That is so that when I cut crossways this way, I will have something holding the onion together other than my hand. If you're cutting and you've cut all the way through the onion, it's fairly difficult when you get to the end of the onion to keep everything together. If you leave about a centimeter on the end, then it makes it so you can dice the onion pretty easily. We'll go through until you reach the point where you stopped cutting. That'll leave you this. Sometimes you'll get pieces if you didn't uniformly go through, but it leaves you this, which you can then put down and dice up. That holds everything together, so you don't have to worry about holding things together, difficulty of that, or possibly slipping as you're trying to hold the onion together as you're cutting. And that's it for today.